You ever see a man pull up to what he thinks is his property, only to discover the real owners have been waiting for him like a perfectly timed trap? Give me a minute, because this one starts with a Porsche and arrogance and ends with an empire collapsing in real time. The shiny black Porsche slammed to a stop in front of a weathered farmhouse, tires chewing into the red Georgia dust and throwing a cloud into the air like a smoke. Signal David Wellington stepped out slow and deliberate, the way a man does when he believes everything around him is an extension of his name. He adjusted his gold Rolex against his wrist, smoothed the sleeves of his tailored jacket, and scanned the land with the casual ownership of someone who's never had to ask permission for anything in his life. 200 acres, rolling fields, a creek line he'd never bothered to walk. He bought the farm 3 years ago as a diversifying asset, a line item in a portfolio fat enough to hide entire towns. To him, this place was a checkbox. He rarely visited. Honestly, he didn't remember the last time he'd even thought about it. But a string of rumors about activity on the property had reached his office. And paranoia is a powerful accelerator when you're used to control. So here he was, 45, oil fortunaire, power suit and Italian boots in the middle of rural quiet, expecting empty rooms and silence. What he got instead was a punch to the ego. Children's clothes flapped on a clothesline he had never installed. Little shirts, tiny socks, a blanket with cartoon dinosaurs faded from too many wash cycles. David's brows knotted. What the hell, he muttered, stepping toward the porch. And then he heard it, laughter. Not the polite, curated kind you hear at country clubs. Real laughter. The kind only kids make when they don't know fear yet. He shoved it open like he owned the air inside. The scene hit him like a system fault he wasn't prepared to diagnose. 3 little black boys, triplets maybe 4 years old, were tearing through the living room playing tag, squealing, bumping into furniture, the whole place alive. A young black woman sat on the couch folding laundry, humming softly like she was in her own home. His couch, his house. The boys froze when they saw him, then bolted behind the woman, clutching her legs with scared eyes. David's voice cut through the room sharp enough to stop time. Who are you? The woman's hands stilled around a tiny t-shirt. She rose halfway, protecting the boys with her body without even thinking. I can explain, sir, she said, voice shaking but not breaking. My name is Grace. These are my sons. Tyler, Jordan, and Marcus. David stepped forward, posture stiff, anger already climbing. He wasn't used to negotiating with anyone, least of all trespassers. Explain. Explain what you broke into my property. His eyes swept the room like a hostile audit. This house is worth $2 million. Grace hugged the boys tighter, swallowing fear with a dignity that surprised him. The place was abandoned, sir. We had nowhere else to go after. I don't care about your pathetic story. He cut her off, reaching for his phone like it was a weapon. I'm calling the police. You have 5 minutes to pack your things and get out of my house. The boys whimpered. One buried his face in her skirt. David expected sobbing, begging, the usual script he'd seen from desperate people his whole life. What he didn't expect was the way Grace lifted her chin and looked him straight in the eye without flinching. All right, Mr. Wellington, she said calmly. She said his last name like she'd used it 1,000 times. David froze with his thumb hovering over 911. The air shifted. Grace didn't move to pack. Instead, she added, voice steady as steel, but before we go, would you like to know what we found in the attic while we were here? David lowered the phone slowly. Something about her tone pulled his stomach into a knot he didn't want to name. The attic, he scoffed, forcing a laugh. He didn't fee. Lady, I bought this property 3 years ago. I know every square inch. There's nothing up there except dust and junk from the previous owners. Grace adjusted Marcus on her hip and tilted her head like she was studying a blueprint he'd never seen. Are you sure, Mr. Wellington? Because we found some very interesting things about the Morrison family and how they lost this land. The name hit David like ice water. Morrison, a name locked in old contracts and quiet legal notes he'd paid to have cleaned up. His throat went dry. How did she know the name of the family that sold him the farm? He tried to regain dominance fast. Listen here, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it ends now. You're a homeless squatter with 3 kids trying to blackmail me with made-up stories? Grace's eyes flashed with something that wasn't fear. It was the kind of cold clarity you see in a person who has already run the full simulation in their head. Game? She repeated softly. Mr. Wellington, I am Grace Morrison, great-granddaughter of Samuel Morrison. My great-grandfather was white, yes. My great-grandmother was a freed black woman he loved when loving her could get him killed. They built a family here, raised children here, prospered here, until people like you decided our land was worth more in your hands. The boy stared up at her, sensing the heat in the air. Tyler tugged her sleeve. Mommy, is this man going to make us leave? David looked at the kids and felt a surge of irrational fury. How dare they look at him like he was the villain in his own house? He snapped back into arrogance, like a man clinging to a failing system by sheer belief. Look, I don't care about your family stories, even if they're true, and I'm not saying they are. I bought this property legally. I have documents. Grace nodded once, almost sadly. Of course you do. Documents forged by a lawyer named Richard Hayes. David's breath stopped. Hayes was the exact attorney he had used to resolve complications. When buying this land, Grace kept going, voice slicing clean through his denial. Hayes forged the paperwork that took this land from my family in 1978. My great-grandfather paid taxes here for decades. Then suddenly the taxes doubled the week before collection. They called it back taxes. They evicted us with a pen. She stared at him. You didn't find a bargain, Mr. Wellington. You inherited a crime. David tried to bulldoze past it. Even if your grandpa wrote fairy tales, that doesn't change ownership. I pay the taxes. I decide who stays. He lifted his phone again. And now you're leaving or the police will remove you. Grace didn't flinch. She set Tyler down gently and walked to a battered suitcase in the corner. David hadn't noticed it before. Before you call, she said, maybe you should see this. She opened the suitcase and pulled out a worn leather briefcase stuffed with yellow documents. David's stomach sank because he recognized the format. The stamps, the letterhead, they were the same kinds of papers Hayes had shown him, except these were older, original, and unmistakably real. This folder contains original property deeds, purchase contracts, birth and marriage records for 4 generations of Morrisons. Grace said quietly. She slid out a sealed envelope. Is the letters. Letters. David's voice came out smaller than he intended. My grandfather wrote them. He didn't have the courage to send them while he was alive. She opened the envelope with deliberate care. They describe exactly how Hayes and his clients stole land from black families across this region. Names, dates, payments. She looked up, including the name Wellington as a frequent buyer of troublesome land. A cold sweat broke out on David's back. Hayes had promised him all traces were buried. If this was real, it wasn't just a farm problem. It was a pipeline that ran straight through his family's empire. He tried to shrug it off. That doesn't prove anything. Even he heard the weakness in his own voice. My grandfather was careful. He recorded conversations with Hayes and his partners. They talk about this land and at least a dozen others your family acquired through the exact same setup. David's mind raced. If recordings existed, they could destroy reputations, contracts, investors, a whole legacy. He forced his arrogance back on like armor. Who's going to believe you? You're homeless, a single mother with 3 kids. I'm David Wellington. People believe Wellingtons. Grace stared at him for a beat, then laughed. Not bitter, not hysterical. A clean, almost amused laugh, like he just said something adorable. Oh, Mr. Wellington, you really didn't do your homework before buying this property, did you? What the hell does that mean? David snapped. Grace walked toward the window, calm as a surgeon. It means while you were busy buying imported cars and watches, I was in law school. David went still. Law school? Yes, Grace said, turning back. And now David really saw her sharp eyes, controlled posture, a confidence that didn't come from bluffing. Grace Morrison, magna cum laude, Columbia University, property law, civil rights. My master's thesis was on recovering ancestral land stolen through document fraud and racial conspiracy. David felt his knees weaken. She wasn't a desperate squatter. She was a trained professional. She slid newer documents out of the case, federal petitions, audit requests, court filings with fresh stamps, all filed in federal court 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks? He whispered. 2 weeks, she confirmed, which is exactly how long my boys and I have been living here, our real home, while the case moved into position. David's world crashed inward. This wasn't random. This was a setup. His visit today wasn't chance, it was timing. He tried to rally. Even if you filed fancy papers, my legal team will bury you in litigation. I have unlimited resources. Fraud, conspiracy to steal property, civil rights violations, tax evasion. We noticed you never reported the reduced taxes on these problematic parcels. She slid a cup across like she was handing him the bill. David took it with trembling hands, more out of shock than choice. My lawyers will prove I bought everything legally. Grace tilted her head. Interesting you mention your lawyers. She picked up the phone and dialed, because I have a call to make. She hit speaker before he could protest. The line rang once. Grace, how is my favorite lawyer? A smooth male voice answered. I hope our friend Wellington is behaving. David's heart dropped. That voice was impossible to mistake. Mr. Wellington, Grace said evenly. Meet my partner at Morrison and Associates, Thomas Richardson. David practically fell into the sofa. Thomas Richardson was the senior partner of the biggest civil rights firm in the country, the same man who had represented Wellington Oil for 15 years. You represented us, David stammered. Richardson's laugh over speaker was colder than winter steel. Past tense, David. Turns out my firm was being used to legitimize land theft via fraudulent documents. Imagine my surprise. Grace watched David's face crumble. Do you remember that audit your firm ran last year? David remembered the invoice, the reassuring calls, every forged Hayes document, every irregular payment, every suspicious contract stamped with your company's signature. Richardson continued, 15 years of evidence. Courtesy of your own records. You betrayed me, David whispered. I redeemed myself, Richardson corrected. There's a difference. The FBI is here to review what you sent. I've got to go. The call ended. David stared at the phone like it had detonated. FBI, he rasped. Grace said it gently, like explaining physics. Federal crimes require federal investigations. Interstate conspiracy. Tax fraud. Multiple states involved. They've been waiting for a clean moment to step in. David tried one last move. How much do you want for this to go away? $1 million? 5? 10? Grace's face changed. Saved pennies for years. Paid taxes religiously. Raised a family here. My grandmother was born in this house. My father learned to walk on this porch, and it was stolen with forged papers and a handshake. She looked at David, tears bright but controlled. So no, I don't want your money. I want my children to grow up in the house their ancestors built. I want every family robbed like mine to get theirs back. I want men like you to learn privilege isn't a license to steal. Her phone buzzed. She glanced, then smiled, not friendly this time, but satisfied. Perfect timing. The media found us. She showed him the screen. CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, local crews. They're on the way. David turned ghost white. How? Because I told them, Grace said simply. Court cases get buried. Judges get leaned on. But truth broadcasts live. She shrugged. That's permanent. The distant chop of helicopter blades grew louder. News vans appeared on the dirt road like a convoy. David spun toward the back door, but Grace's voice stopped him cold. Don't run. FBI's already parked on the back road. Agent Kim's been waiting 20 minutes. Another knock rattled the front door. Mr. Wellington, this is Rebecca Torres, CNN. We'd like to ask you about allegations of document fraud and land theft. David's phone went insane and his handboard members, investors, frantic texts. Grace watched calmly. And you can stop looking for your company servers. They were seized at 6 this morning. Warrant David slumped. How long have you planned this? 5 years, Grace said, tidying toys with the same calm she used in court. Since the day I graduated and swore to bring our home back. The front door opened. Federal agents and reporters filled the porch like a flood. Agent Kim stepped inside, badge out. Mr. Wellington, you need to come with us. David tried to protest. I want an attorney. Of course, Kim said. But Richardson and Associates withdrew this morning, conflict of interest. Grace stepped close, voice low but loud enough for cameras. You used privilege to steal. I used education to reclaim. David looked around, lights, microphones, agents, his empire collapsing live. Why this way? He begged. Grace lifted Tyler onto her hip. Because truth in a courtroom can be delayed. Truth on camera can't be erased. As David was escorted out, The cameras captured every step of his humiliation. Grace stood on the porch with her sons, watching the man who thought he owned everything learn what it feels like to lose control in public. 6 months later, the headline was plain: Wellington Empire declares bankruptcy after federal investigation. David Wellington sentenced to 15 years for fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. His company dismantled, properties auctioned to pay penalties. The man who once ruled boardrooms now shared a cell with people he once dismissed as nobodies. Grace Morrison became a national force. Her firm exploded with cases reclaiming stolen ancestral land. Universities invited her to speak not about luck, but about strategy, patience, and justice. On that same porch, restored and painted fresh, she watched Tyler, Jordan, and Marcus play in the yard their great-great-grandfather once planted with his own hands. A new baby was on the way, a generation that would grow up knowing they belong. Tyler ran up to her one evening. "Mommy, teacher said you're famous." Grace smiled, pulling him close. "I'm not famous, baby. I'm just doing what's right." And that's the core of it. This wasn't revenge. It was preparation meeting opportunity. A mother turned pain into purpose, education into leverage, and timing into a precision strike that brought down a dynasty without raising her voice. So tell me, have you ever seen someone the world underestimated flip the whole system because they refused to accept injustice as normal? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more stories where courage and strategy rewrite the ending, subscribe and stay with me.